Hi, I'm Mark Clugwell. Welcome to the Photographer Academy and our Speedlight series. In this section, we're looking at the kind of all the information on the back of a speedlight. If you're just getting started with speedlight photography, you'll usually want to actually kind of throw away the manual and just pick it up and fiddle with it. That's at least what I do. But there's pretty much the same fundamental things that you'll find across all of the speedlights, no matter what manufacturer. In this case, what we've got is basically, pretty much the same flash. One's a Canon, one's a third party, in this case a Yongnuo, and it'll basically do very, very similar things with it. But it's really about setting up the back of the actual speedlight, how it's all going to work. So let's just take a little look on the back, and I'll explain to you as simple as I can why you would use the settings for specific photographs. So obviously the first thing to do is let's switch it on. And in this case, we can see instantly we've got a kind of a TTL mode at the top here. ETTL is the Canon's way to say it's through the lens evaluative metering with it. As far as the zoom in is concerned, it's 14mm, the sound is on, the battery is up in the top. This is the kind of important one to see to begin with, and there's on this little flash here, it's showing there's like a little bit of a flash coming out of it. That means this flash is going to fire, all right? What do I mean by that? Well, when it's in a master and a commander mode, we don't necessarily need it to fire, okay? We can tell it actually fire the other flashes, but don't flash yourself and things really. Okay, then we've got some other little things which is going to be the power guide. So this is how we kind of increase the power just by finding something on your controls. I'll talk about these in a minute. Will allow us to actually increase the power as a rule where you turn it in a clockwise direction or in a minus in an anti-clockwise direction, so on with it. Okay, so 0, 0 means it's basically just set in the middle. Right, what else are we going to do? The first things to do is kind of the modes. So in the mode ETTL, this means that it's technically an automatic exposure. Even if the camera was set to a manual working exposure, so I'm choosing its ISO, I'm choosing its shutter speed, I'm choosing its aperture, I can still set the flash in a through the lens metering mode, and it will try and equal my working exposure. Okay, so that's the kind of where we're going through. All right, so if you're working in an automatic mode on the camera, the hot shoe, which is its communication device where the flash meets the camera itself, all the information is going to be passed between them all the time, whatever mode we're in. But obviously, if you're going to be using flash, you usually want to actually kind of set the shutter speed to a designated speed. Otherwise, it doesn't know what to do. So you've got to really work in shutter priority where you're going to set it to 125th or whatever it would be, okay? Otherwise, in an aperture priority, it's going to kind of drag the shutter and everything else, especially in dark kind of locations. Okay, so we're back up to here again. So the ETTL is that evaluative. If I press the mode button, which is here, once, you go into a manual mode. This means that I'm in total control of the flash now. I'm going to tell it exactly how much flash to fire, but the intelligence at this stage is just nothing. It's just fire, yes? I've set the power of the flash. I've set my working aperture. Basically, it's got no control of it. I've overpowered it. In other words, I'm telling it what to do. Whereas in the TTL version, basically the camera and the flash are working in harmony together. In the manual mode, I'm telling it, I'm the boss. I know what I want to do, even though it's going to be a little bit more work for me to actually get that perfect photograph, and I might have to use a meter to actually set the power that I want and so on. There's about consistency of the flash really. So in manual mode, the next one is going to be as far as the multi is concerned. The multi is a strobosonic, okay, and this allows us to change how many flashes we want to fire in a designated time, and basically how many flashes that it's going to happen as such really, okay. So there's going to be the hertz and the actual multi as well with it and things. Right, let's go backwards. So if we're in ETTL mode, in an automatic mode, and we want to actually add a little bit more flash, what I need to do is actually work in the plus part here. So in other words, if I just press the plus button, you can see now it's highlighted here. And now, like I mentioned, if I increase by turning the wheel in a clockwise direction, I can increase the amount in thirds of a stop, okay? In the same way, I can decrease the amount in thirds of a stop as well. So that's the first kind of control of power when we're even working in an automatic mode, okay? So there are things like auto exposure bracketing on the camera and so on that you can use, but basically take control. You want consistency of exposure from the first shot to the last shot. Even if it's wrong, at least you're going to make all the corrections to all the images instead of to the one. No, that's a bad habit, don't do that. But at least we want to do is control it, okay? So in the manual, why would I want to use a flash in a manual? Well, perhaps I'm bouncing it off a wall. Perhaps I'm kind of wanting more flash to get across towards a big group. So there's different ways I'm going to want to actually tell the flash, look, I know you're good and I know you're going to do a great job, but I need that little bit more punch, please, okay? I need to fight through the sun. If you think about when we most often use flash, it's either going to fight sunlight, in other words, to help soften the contrast if the sunlight is directly onto the subject, or it's going to give us some quality of contrast if the subject is being backlit. In other words, there's not enough quality of light coming onto the front, so that's when it's going to work. Or, of course, we're using it for creative effect in the likes of dark locations or whatever it would be and things. So, again, think about how we're going to use the flash. Then we start to look at the FEB, which allows you to have some kind of bracketing on the exposure. I'm not a massive fan of that at all. Okay. However, when we talked about the sync with this flash, it's very, very easy to do. So in other words, if I want to change its sync mode from its normal flash mode, so in other words, it will fire perfectly well up to the manufacturer's designated shutter speed. In other words, it's usually about 1/60th or 200th of a second it works with, okay? If I want to actually shoot in a higher shutter speed, sometimes the camera, even in manual mode, won't allow you to fire it. So you've got to actually set it in the sync. So if we just go into the sync, when we look at the lightning bolt now and that little H, that means that we can shoot with the flash in that higher sync mode. When would we use it? Well, normal flash is basically, you know, anytime, anywhere, except when you're in very, very bright sunlight and you're having to use very high shutter speeds because you're wanting a wide open aperture like f2.8, whatever it would be. So in other words, the ambient light is so much that it's actually already giving you the exposure, and you want to cut the ambient light down to give you dramatic skies and so on. So you want to use that high sync speed flash, as it were, to basically work in the way that you want it to. So in other words, I want to use 2,000th of a second shutter speed, and so I can shoot still at 2.8, but then the flash is going to give me the working exposure on the aperture is concerned. All right, so that is a perfect example to blacken skies why I would use the high speed sync. Then we look at the other sync option here, which is the second curtain sync. It's probably the most underused setting by many, many photographers, unless you're the likes of a wedding photographer that shoots a lot of interiors and you're shooting the functions or the first dance or whatever it is. Pretty much if we're shooting inside, we want the flash to trigger at the end of the exposure, not at the beginning of the exposure. So once I kind of go indoors, I automatically switch into second curtain sync mode. Remember, that's those three triangles and one of them is black, all right? So instead of it firing at the beginning of the exposure, it's going to go at the end. So should there be any movement by me or by them, basically the ambient light is going to pick up the kind of the blur, yeah, either from them or by me. but the flash fire will then freeze it, and basically it's going to minimize the kind of the movement lines from the ambient light source itself and things really. So as a rule of thumb, if you're working outside in very, very bright sunlight, or you look into darkened skies, you want to be using high-speed sync. If you're, soon as you walk inside of a kind of a home or a reception or whatever it be, I'd recommend you swapping the flash straight into second curtain sync, because probably you're going to be using slower shutter speeds and so on. So you want actually to control when the flash is going to fire and things really. So that's the kind of the big tips on that. Then as far as the other buttons are concerned, all flashes are slightly different. Now this flash, which is a third-party flash that mimics the likes of the Canon 600 series. This is a Yongnuo 600 EX-RT2, all right? Are they all of them? Pretty much, they're all RT2s, yeah? But basically, they're not a Canon make. They're designed to go on a Canon camera, and the different third-party manufacturers deliver usually the same technology that you'll see with the own camera manufacturer's flash. They'll kind of build it in as well with it. So I could easily have a combination of a third-party flash and the camera manufacturer's flash, as long as they're designed to work together. In other words, they're the same kind of brand. So what we've got on here, when I press that little kind of zigzag button on the left-hand side, in fact, this on the Yongnuo came as an update in the firmware. I would definitely encourage you, if your flash allows you to do it, you'll usually find that on the kind of the side, you might have a little bit of a USB port here, so you can basically actually plug it in to the software or onto the computer with it to be able to actually kind of update it and things really. And in fact, it wasn't until we bought a new flash and we realized how great this thing was that we went away and we kind of updated everything else. Anyway, if I want to actually just keep pressing this button, it's going to scroll through the different types of setup. So initially we can see that it's on wireless off. So this means there's no communication going on at all. The next thing will be, if I press it again, it means it's going to become a master. Now, some of the manufacturers call it a commander instead of a master. Pretty much all the manufacturers, though, call a supplementary flash that is going to be controlled by a master or a commander, a slave flash. So as long as you're aware of that terminology as well, you can kind of start to actually work quite quickly, but you've got to make things there kind of working. So in other words, this one will be a slave to this one can be a slave to this one. However, this one cannot be a slave to it because it's a different model, and this one works on infrared. But these two together, in fact, can communicate once more. One's a Canon, one's a Yongnuo, but they'll basically communicate, and one can act as a master and one can act as a slave in exactly the same way. Once we've set this in place by pressing the little mirror button, the little set button, yeah, you'll probably see that there's some more communication. It changes itself on the back here, all right? And by doing that, it'll allow you to actually then understand that this one is now going to do a certain job. So if I just switch on a secondary flash for 1 minute, this one is already in a slave mode, okay? So in fact, just without me doing anything, you might have seen the little blue on here turn from blue to green when it actually has a communication with it. Let me show you that again. If I just switch this one on here. Okie doke. Let's clear it anyway, just in case it was set up for something else. Now if I press this little side button, we go into here and we press it again to go into the slave. Let me just show it is, it's slave. Pressing OK. Now you can see the blue button here is now going to turn green at some stage when it gets the communication from each other. There we go, it's gone green, and that means it's now ready to actually communicate. So this now master is controlling and telling the others to actually fire and do its job and things really. But we're doing a whole film just on a master and commander flashes. Remember, we're just going through the actual back of the flashes here. What else have we got? There's going to be things like menus, and pretty much they'll all be slightly different, and they'll all allow you to change things in a different way. But it's pointless me really going through them with you, because all the different manufacturers will have a slightly different kind of setup with it. However, in the ID part here, you can see in this case, this is 0000. This is the default that this flash comes with. And basically, if I was to turn this to another number, so pressing the set button, now you can see it is 2. Now you can see on the top here how it's basically moved into a blue again. Because now what I've done is it can't be a master to send the communication to the other flashes. This is the only flash that just fired. Why? It's because I've set it into a different kind of ID or a different channel and so on with it, all right? So if in doubt, remember I was saying to you, double press the clear, and then it's going to reset everything back to a camera manufacturer's default with it, making sure your flashes are on. If we set this into the master, if something was a slave before, it's going to remember that it was a slave, and basically just give it a couple of seconds to acknowledge that one is a master and one is a slave, and then basically one is telling the other one. So if you start to now look at the menus with it, you're going to have options once you get into here to kind of switch different flashes on and off when they're in this master and commander mode. So look, that's the kind of the basics on the back. However, all right, if we just kind of remember that reset, it's kind of a quick habit unless you're setting things into very certain kind of setups, because it's going to clear everything on the flash. But if in doubt, reset, all right? So if we want to do the last kind of thing to really look at, really, you'll see that on here, I've got this wide angle diffuser kind of flipped out, yeah? If I push it back in again, when I come back onto the back, it's now allowing me to actually kind of work in the zoom mode. When the flippy is out, the wide angle diffuser mark, that's the correct name, you can see by default it sets itself to 14 M, okay, 14 mil as far as the wide angle. When I push it in, it basically resets it back to whatever the lens is based on. Why? Because it's in automatic zoom. As I zoom out, I touch the exposure, it automatically acknowledges it needs to push the flash further away because I'm using a telephoto lens. As I basically shrink it in, you can see how it manually adjusts itself, or automatically, I should say, adjusts itself to the point of where we get into the 24 mil. Now, some flashes, they even allow you to zoom out to about 200 mil. And there are some abilities as well for you to be able to actually zoom your flash in a manual way, especially if I was working in a dance or in a church and I want to actually zoom the flash into a performer, the bride and groom, wherever it be. So I want the flash to think I'm working on a 200 mil lens or a 150 mil lens, but in fact I'm wide open. So in other words, I'm quite dark in the whole scene, and then obviously I'm just giving a little bit of blip of illumination like we are kind of theatre light in. And so in some way in here, you're going to be able to kind of move through the different modes to kind of get to the changes here. Now in this case, I can just press the zoom button on the side and manually change it. Now can you see how it's gone from A to M? And this means I am manually changing the actual how far it can go. And you can see this 600 model allows me to zoom to the 200. So that's a very, very small part of the image. That basically is faking I'm using a very, very long lens. Interesting, if I go quiet and I press the zoom again, all right, and you'll see it highlights the 200. As I turn the dial, you'll hear the motor within the flash take the flash magnification away to actually allow the wide angle. Just go quiet for a minute and listen in. And when you get back to the A, obviously it's back into automatic mode again. But you could hear how that motor was basically telling the magnification part of in here, and you can basically see it, how it kind of will change it. Custom functions on all the flashes will allow you to set certain things like don't go to sleep or do go to sleep, to kind of make sure you're going into a high-speed sync mode. You know, you set flashes up, but in the basic way of what we just did, you should be able to take the camera out of the flash, out of the box, stick it onto the camera, switch it on, and be photographing within about 10 minutes. I kind of guarantee you'll get that familiarity, including being able to actually link two flashes together if they're in the same kind of brand or in the same kind of mix. Hope you've enjoyed this film. I'll see you in the next Speedlight film. Take care. Bye-bye.